Welcome to the archive. I'm Jen, your host. This is episode 2. Where does consciousness go when we dream? Every single night, every one of us performs one of the strangest experiments imaginable. We willingly surrender consciousness. For several hours, we disappear into a world that can feel just as vivid, emotional, and convincing as waking life. Sometimes we wake remembering every detail, every smell, every color. Other times, we can't remember anything at all. And despite centuries of philosophy, decades of neuroscience, and some of the brightest minds in human history trying to answer the question, we still don't fully understand what consciousness actually is. So before we venture into theories, speculation, and one idea that I've personally been fascinated by for years, I think we need to begin with what we actually know. Let's open up today's archive. Consciousness sounds like one of those words everyone understands until someone asks you to define it. Scientists generally describe consciousness as your subjective experience of the world. It's what it feels like to see the color blue, to hear your favorite song, to taste coffee, to remember your childhood, to just be you. And that last part is where things become extraordinary. Because although neuroscience has become remarkably good at identifying which parts of the brain are active while we're conscious, we still don't know why those brain processes produce an inner experience at all. Imagine I handed you the complete engineering blueprint of a violin. Every string, every piece of wood, every vibration, you could understand exactly how it works. But nowhere inside those blueprints would you find the feeling of hearing the music, feeling the emotion of listening to a symphony. That is, in simple terms, what philosophers call the hard problem of consciousness. It's not asking how the brain processes information. Science is making incredible progress there. It's asking something even deeper. Why does any of it feel like anything at all? Why isn't the brain simply processing information without an inner experience attached to it? Nobody currently knows. And I have to admit, I find that both deeply frustrating and unbelievably exciting. Researchers haven't stopped at saying we don't know. They've spent decades building some remarkably clever ideas about how consciousness might work. One influential theory imagines the brain almost like a theater. Picture hundreds of actors backstage, stagehands moving scenery, musicians tuning instruments, costume designers rushing around. Everything is happening at once. But only whatever steps into the spotlight becomes part of the performance the audience can actually see. Some neuroscientists think consciousness works in a similar way. Your brain is constantly processing an astonishing amount of information. Most of it never reaches your conscious awareness. Only the information that enters the brain's spotlight becomes part of your immediate experience. Think about driving home after work. You stop at traffic lights, you steer around corners, you avoid pedestrians, then you pull into your driveway and suddenly realize, I barely remember the journey. Like, how on earth did I get home? Your brain was doing an incredible amount of work. You simply weren't consciously paying attention to most of it. Another influential idea suggests the brain works less like a camera and more like a detective. So instead of passively recording reality, it's constantly making predictions about what's going to happen next. Then it compares those predictions with the information coming in through your senses. Most of the time, it's astonishingly accurate. Have you ever felt your phone vibrate in your pocket, gone to reach for it, and discovered nothing happened? Your brain predicted a familiar sensation so convincingly that for a moment, a brief moment, it became your reality. The brain doesn't simply observe the world. It actively constructs your experience of it, which brings us to sleep. Sleep isn't one long, unchanging state. Throughout the night, your brain cycles through several different stages. Some are deep and restorative. Others are surprisingly active. One of those stages is called REM sleep, REM, rapid eye movement. During REM sleep, parts of the brain become incredibly active. Your eyes dart rapidly beneath your eyelids. Visual and emotional centers light up. Body, meanwhile, is temporarily paralyzed to stop you physically acting out your dreams. It's during REM sleep that our most vivid dreams usually occur, although dreams can happen during other stages too. Scientists think dreaming may help consolidate memories, process emotions, and perhaps even refine the brain's internal predictions about the world. But here's the important point. Those are leading theories, not settled facts. There is still remarkable uncertainty about why we dream at all. And then there are the little mysteries almost all of us have experienced. The sudden jolt as we're drifting off to sleep, the strange sensation of falling. These are known as hypnic jerks. Despite how dramatic they feel, they're completely normal. They're thought to happen as your brain and body transition between wakefulness and sleep, occasionally producing a brief burst of motor activity before everything settles into the night's first sleep stage. Then there's déjà vu, that uncanny feeling that you've already lived through a moment that's happening for the very first time. The leading scientific explanation is surprisingly down to earth. Many neuroscientists think déjà vu is a brief mismatch between systems involved in familiarity and memory. Imagine opening two almost identical files on your computer. For a split second, your brain mistakes one for the other before immediately correcting itself. The sensation is powerful, but fleeting. And yet, even after everything we've learned about the brain, after all the scans, after decades of sleep laboratories, after thousands of scientific papers, we still cannot answer some of the biggest questions. Why is there an inner experience at all? Why does consciousness exist? And where does that experience seem to go every single night when we fall asleep? That is where today's archive begins. Long before neuroscience, before MRI scanners, before anyone had ever heard the word consciousness, people were already asking exactly the same questions. Where do we go when we dream? Are dreams simply stories our minds invent? Are they windows into something beyond ourselves? What's remarkable isn't that different cultures answered those questions differently. It's that almost every civilization believed dreams mattered. Ancient Egypt offers one of the earliest and most fascinating examples. The Egyptians didn't see dreams as random mental noise. They believed dreams could be messages from the gods, from the dead, or glimpses into the future. One of the oldest surviving dream books, the Chester Beatty Papyrus, lists different dreams alongside their possible meanings, almost like an ancient guidebook for the sleeping mind. People even slept in temples, hoping for healing dreams or divine guidance. One of the most famous stories is the dream stele of Thutmose the fourth. As the story goes, while resting beneath the Great Sphinx, the young prince dreamt that the monument itself promised him the throne if he cleared away the surrounding sand. Whether the dream truly happened is almost besides the point. What matters is that an entire civilization considered a dream powerful enough to legitimize a king. Travel east into Mesopotamia, and we find a similar belief. Dreams weren't treated as private experiences, they were public ones. Kings consulted priests, generals sought guidance before battles. Even in the epic of Gilgamesh, dreams repeatedly warn, guide, and foreshadow what is to come. The question wasn't, did this dream mean anything? It was, what is it trying to tell us? The ancient Greeks began asking a slightly different question. Some believed dreams were still messages from the gods. Others wondered whether they came from somewhere much closer, the human mind itself. People traveled to the healing temples of Asclepius, sleeping in sacred spaces in the hope that a dream would reveal a cure for illness. Meanwhile, philosophers quietly disagreed. Plato believed dreams could reveal hidden parts of ourselves, that daylight kept under control. Aristotle took a far more natural approach. Perhaps dreams weren't divine at all. Perhaps they were simply echoes of waking life lingering inside the brain. Even 2,000 years ago, the debate had already begun. The Romans inherited many of these Greek ideas, treating dreams as everything from divine warnings to political omens. For them, dreams were simply another way the universe might reveal its intentions. The Abrahamic traditions also gave dreams an important place, but with an important note of caution. In Judaism and Christianity, dreams could carry genuine meaning. Joseph interpreted Pharaoh's dreams. Daniel explained visions that others could not. Joseph, the earthly father of Jesus, was guided through dreams. Yet not every dream was considered divine. Discernment mattered. A dream might be meaningful, or it might simply be a dream. Islam developed one of history's most sophisticated traditions of dream interpretation. Rather than assuming every dream came from the same source, classical Islamic scholars often described three broad categories. Some dreams were believed to come from God. Some reflected our own thoughts and daily experiences. Others were considered confusing or disturbing dreams with no deeper message at all. It's a surprisingly nuanced way of thinking about something we still struggle to explain today. Then we arrive in India and China, where dreams become something even more intriguing. Not messages or warnings, but philosophical puzzles. Hindu philosophy explores dreaming as one of several fundamental states of consciousness, using it to ask what the self truly is. Buddhist traditions often use dreams to remind us that experience itself can be fleeting, constructed, and impermanent. And then there's one of my favorite stories in all of philosophy. The Chinese philosopher Zhang once dreamt he was a butterfly. When he awoke, he found himself asking, was I then a man dreaming I was a butterfly, or am I now a butterfly dreaming I am a man? More than 2,000 years later, we're still asking versions of that same question. Fast forward to the 19th and 20th centuries, and dreams moved from temples into therapists' offices. Sigmund Freud believed dreams disguised our deepest wishes. Carl Jung thought they revealed symbolic patterns and hidden parts of ourselves. Modern psychology is more cautious. Rather than treating dreams as coded messages waiting to be cracked, most psychologists see them as reflections of memory, emotion, and the brain's extraordinary ability to weave experiences into stories. What's striking isn't that all these cultures agreed. They didn't. Some believed dreams came from the gods, some from the unconscious, some from the body, others from the structure of reality itself. But across the thousands of years, across the many continents, all of the languages, humanity kept returning to exactly the same mystery. Whatever dreams are, they've never felt insignificant, and perhaps that's why we've never stopped trying to understand them. We've reached a different part of today's archive. Up until now, we've been looking backwards at history, at culture, at the countless ways humanity has tried to understand dreams. Now, we're going to turn to the present and to a very different question. Not what did people believe, but what do we actually know? The honest answer is less than we'd like. Neuroscience has made astonishing progress over the past century. We can watch the brain in remarkable detail. We can observe which networks become active while someone is awake, sleeping, dreaming, remembering, but knowing where something is happening isn't the same as understanding why it happens. The more we've learned about the brain, the more mysterious consciousness has become. It's life's biggest question. The more mysterious consciousness has become. Scientists have proposed several serious theories. None have solved the mystery, but each offers a different way of looking at it. One of the best known is called global workspace theory. Imagine a busy theater. Backstage, hundreds of people are working at once. Lighting is adjusted. Most of all that activity never reaches the audience. Only whatever steps into the spotlight becomes part of the performance everyone experiences together. Countless processes happen beneath your awareness every second. Only a small number ever reach the stage of conscious experience. Another fascinating idea is integrated information theory. It asks what consciousness is. So let's stick with the theater hall. Imagine the orchestra. A single violin on its own, beautiful. A trumpet, pretty. A cello, equally stunning. But together, something entirely new emerges. The music isn't found inside any individual instrument. It exists in the relationships between them. Integrated information theory suggests consciousness may work in a similar way, not because one part of the brain creates it, but because billions of neurons become something greater through their connections. It's an elegant idea. It's also highly debated. Then there's predictive processing. This has become one of my favorite ways of thinking about the brain. According to this framework, your brain isn't waiting for reality to arrive. It's constantly trying to predict reality before it happens. Consider a detective solving a mystery. Every clue changes how the detective is understanding the case. The brain works similarly. It makes its best guess about what's happening, then updates that guess whenever new evidence arrives, which is most of the time. Those predictions are astonishingly accurate. Sometimes they're not, as always in life, but think back to the phone vibration example from earlier, or optical illusions, or hearing your name in a crowded room when nobody actually called you. The brain isn't failing. It's doing exactly what it evolved to do, making its best prediction with incomplete information. Then we move beyond neuroscience into philosophy. Some philosophers argue that consciousness might be a fundamental feature of reality itself. This idea is called panpsychism. It doesn't suggest that rocks have thoughts or trees are secretly writing poetry. Instead, it asks whether some incredibly simple form of experience could exist through nature, becoming richer as systems become more complex. It's an ancient philosophical idea that has recently returned to serious academic discussion. Notice, though, we've crossed the line. We're no longer talking about established scientific evidence. We are talking about philosophy. That's an important distinction. The same is true of ideas like biocentrism, which places consciousness at the center of reality, or quantum consciousness, which proposes that quantum processes may somehow contribute to the conscious experience. These ideas are undeniably fascinating, but at present, they remain speculative. They are not part of mainstream scientific consensus. And then we arrive at one of the most famous ideas in modern physics, the many worlds interpretation. This is often misunderstood. Many worlds doesn't claim that consciousness jumps between universes. It does not suggest dreams are glimpses into alternate realities. What it proposes is something far more technical, that every possible outcome of a quantum event continues to exist in its own branching history. Whether that's true remains one of the great debates in modern physics. Some people take that idea a step further. They propose thought experiments like quantum immortality. These ideas are intellectually fascinating, but it's important to be clear. They're philosophical thought experiments, not established science. So where does that leave us? With more questions than answers. Why does consciousness exist at all? Why should electrical activity inside the brain produce the rich inner world that we all experience? Why can an unconscious collection of atoms somehow become aware that it exists? After centuries of research, does consciousness remain one of the greatest unsolved mysteries in science? The truth is, we don't know. And I think there's something wonderfully honest about admitting that, because once we reach the edge of established evidence, we're left with something that has driven human curiosity for thousands of years. Possibility. And that's exactly where I'd like to leave the evidence. We've reached the point in today's archive where the evidence begins to run out. Everything we've explored so far has come from neuroscience, history, psychology, or philosophy. What comes next belongs somewhere different. Not on the shelf marked fact. Not even on the shelf marked theory. Let's file it under possibility. I'd like to leave you with a thought experiment. Not because I think it's true, not because I'm trying to convince you of anything, simply because it's a question I've never quite been able to let go of. Every thought experiment begins with two simple words. What if? So, what if consciousness isn't quite as fixed as we instinctively believe? Not souls or ghosts or magic, just something we haven't fully understood yet. So every night we close our eyes, and without questioning it, we accept an entirely different reality. While we're dreaming, we rarely stop and ask, is any of this real? We simply we live it. We laugh, we grieve, we run, we fall. Sometimes we wake carrying those emotions with us long after the dream is faded. That has always fascinated me. Not because I think dreams are supernatural, quite the opposite, because they demonstrate just how extraordinary consciousness already is. One experience I've always found especially curious is déjà vu. Science offers a compelling explanation involving memory and familiarity, and that explanation may well be entirely correct. But every now and then, I find myself wondering, what if that strange feeling isn't simply a memory slipping over itself? What if it's more like two almost identical photographs, briefly sliding across one another, perfectly aligned for the smallest fraction of a second before drifting apart again? Not evidence, just imagination. And then there are those dreams that feel impossibly real, the ones where entire lifetimes seem to unfold, where you wake emotionally exhausted or strangely comforted, maybe convinced that somehow you were somewhere else. Science explains many of these experiences through memory, emotion, prediction, and the remarkable activity of the sleeping brain. Those explanations may prove to be completely sufficient. In fact, I rather suspect that they will. But consciousness has a habit of reminding us how much we still don't know. So here's the thought that has stayed with me for years. Imagine consciousness not as a single thread, but as an enormous tapestry, countless threads running alongside one another. Most of the time, our awareness follows just one, smoothly, quietly, without ever noticing the rest. But perhaps, very occasionally, the weave shifts. Just enough for us to glimpse another pattern before everything settles back into place. Maybe that's one way of imagining déjà vu. Maybe it's one way of imagining those dreams that refuse to let us go. Or perhaps it's nothing like that at all. There are obvious objections to this idea. Memory alone could explain much of what I've just described. Neuroscience may eventually explain the rest. This thought experiment doesn't replace those explanations. It simply sits beside them. Sometimes an idea earns its place not because it's right, but because it encourages us to ask a better question. Do I believe this is true? Honestly, I don't know. It's definitely a possibility. And, that's a surprisingly comfortable place to be. Not because uncertainty is satisfying, but curiosity doesn't require certainty to be worthwhile. If consciousness has taught us anything, it's that reality is almost always stranger than our first explanation. Perhaps one day neuroscience will explain every part of it. I genuinely hope so. Until then, I think there's still room on the shelves of the archive for thoughtful questions that remain beautifully unanswered. When I first began researching today's episode, I thought I was asking a fairly simple question. Where does consciousness go when we dream? But somewhere along the way, I realized I might have been asking the wrong question. Perhaps the more interesting question isn't where consciousness goes. Maybe it's what consciousness actually is. Tonight, we've traveled through thousands thousands of years of human curiosity. We've stood beneath the Great Sphinx with an Egyptian prince. We've followed the kings into Mesopotamia, sat beside Greek philosophers, listened to Buddhist monks, wondered with Zhuangzi whether we were the dream or the dreamer. We've explored what neuroscience can confidently explain, looked honestly at what it cannot explain. And perhaps most importantly, we've seen that some of humanity's greatest questions have survived precisely because no single answer has ever been enough. I don't find that frustrating anymore. I find it beautiful. Sometimes we assume unanswered questions are failures, proof that we simply haven't worked hard enough yet. But I think there's something else for sure. Perhaps they're more like invitations to stay curious, to keep exploring, to keep us humble enough to say, I don't, but I would love to find out. Because every single night, without even thinking about it, your brain creates that entire world inside your mind. People you've never met, places you've never been, conversations that never happened, moments that can make you laugh or cry, fall in love, or wake with your heart racing. And by breakfast time, most of it has quietly disappeared. Isn't that freaking astonishing? Whatever dreams ultimately are, whether they're memory or emotion, prediction, or something humanity hasn't yet imagined, they remind us that consciousness remains one of the greatest mysteries we've ever encountered. Perhaps some mysteries don't lose their beauty by remaining mysteries. It only deepens that beauty, magnifies it. There's a line by Edgar Allan Poe that has stayed with me ever since I first read it. I can't think of a more fitting way to close today's archive. All that we see or seem is but a dream within a dream. Whether Poe meant those words literally, metaphorically, perhaps somewhere in between, I'll leave that for you to decide. So thank you for joining me as we opened another file from the archive. Until next time, stay curious because every answer has a history and every mystery leaves an archive behind.